We are tracking an extraordinarily consequential moment in the standoff between the United States and Iran. As of today, May 29th, President Trump is in the Situation Room at the White House, actively deliberating over whether to sign a deal with Iran that would potentially end weeks of military confrontation. He has released a lengthy public statement confirming his presence there and laying out what he describes as the key terms of an agreement. But surrounding that statement is a swirl of competing claims, contradictory signals from the Iranian side, troubling reports about what might actually be inside this deal, and continued military activity on the ground that raises serious questions about whether any agreement, if signed, would actually hold. We are going to walk through all of it carefully because the details here matter enormously. This is not a situation where the headline tells you everything you need to know. The fine print, the competing narratives, and the gaps between what each side is saying publicly are where the real story lives. Let's start with Trump's statement because it is worth going through in detail. The president confirmed he is in the Situation Room making what he called a final determination on the deal. Here's what he laid out as the terms. Iran must agree that it will never have a nuclear weapon or bomb. The Strait of Hormuz must be immediately open, with no tolls on unrestricted shipping traffic in both directions. Any water mines or explosive devices in the strait must be removed or detonated. Trump noted that American naval assets have already cleared a number of mines through detonation, and Iran will be required to handle whatever remains. He also addressed the highly enriched uranium that was buried deep underground following the B-2 bomber strikes that collapsed tunnel systems above it. According to Trump, the United States, which he described as one of only 2 countries with the mechanical capability to do so, along with China, would enter Iran and physically retrieve that material in coordination with Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. And he stated explicitly that no money will be exchanged, at least for now. That last phrase, at least for now, is doing a lot of work, and we will come back to it. But the most striking line in the entire statement, and one that deserves serious scrutiny, is how Trump characterized the naval blockade. He did not say the blockade will be lifted once the deal is signed. He did not frame it as a conditional action tied to Iranian compliance. He said, and this is important, that the naval blockade will now be lifted, present tense, immediate, as though the decision has already been made and is already in effect. He even addressed the ships that have been held up in the strait due to the blockade, telling them they may begin heading home and signing off with a personal message wishing their families well. Now, why does that distinction matter so much? Because the blockade has been one of the most powerful pieces of leverage the United States holds in this negotiation. Iranian oil cannot move while that blockade is in place. Iranian economic lifelines are constrained. The pressure it creates is real and significant. Announcing that it is now over, before a deal is formally signed, before the highly enriched uranium has been retrieved, before Iranian compliance has been verified in any meaningful way, represents an enormous concession of leverage. If the deal then falls apart, or if Iran fails to follow through on its commitments, that leverage is gone. You cannot simply reinstall a naval blockade without enormous diplomatic and military cost. This raises a fundamental question that does not yet have a clear answer. Did the United States just blink? Now let's talk about what the Iranians are saying, because it stands in direct and troubling contrast to what Trump outlined. While the president is in the Situation Room, apparently on the verge of signing, senior Iranian officials are making statements that sound nothing like a country preparing to finalize a peace agreement. Ghalibaf, who serves as a senior figure in the Iranian power structure and may effectively be running day-to-day operations given ongoing uncertainty about the supreme leader's condition, made a statement that should be read carefully by anyone evaluating where Iran actually stands. He said, and I want to be precise about this because the language matters, we seize concessions not through dialogue but with missiles. In negotiations, we merely make the other side understand. We have no trust in guarantees or words. Only actions are the measure. No action will be taken before the other side acts. The winner of any agreement is the one who is better prepared for war from the day after. Read that again. This is a senior Iranian official speaking during active negotiations, saying that Iran does not trust words or guarantees, that it operates through missiles, and that the real competition begins the day after any agreement is signed. That is not the posture of a country that has genuinely accepted the terms being described by the American president. That is the posture of a country that views any agreement as a tactical pause, not a strategic settlement. And Ghalibaf is not the only Iranian voice striking that tone. Mohsen Rezai, the military advisor to the supreme leader, issued a direct threat tied to the naval blockade, saying that if the blockade continues beyond a certain time frame, Iran will be the one to initiate the next military strike. Now here is the extraordinary irony of that statement. Trump just announced the blockade is over. So Iran's military leadership was threatening renewed military action over a blockade that the American president simultaneously declared finished. These two things are happening in the same news cycle on the same day, and they paint a picture of a negotiation process that is far more chaotic and far less settled than either side's public statements would suggest. There is also a direct contradiction at the heart of the deal's most critical element. Trump's statement says the United States will enter Iran and retrieve the highly enriched uranium that this has been agreed to. But the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, and other senior Iranian officials have been emphatic and repeated in their public position. They will never give up their uranium. Never. That is not a nuanced diplomatic position with wiggle room built in. That is a categorical, public, repeated commitment made to the Iranian people and to the world. For both of those things to be true simultaneously, that Iran has agreed to surrender its enriched uranium and that Iran will never surrender its enriched uranium is a logical impossibility. One of these statements is false, and the consequences of finding out which one after the deal is signed would be severe. Now, let's get to the report that is arguably the most alarming element of everything we are tracking today. The New York Times is reporting that the deal under negotiation includes a $300 billion investment fund for Iran. Not direct cash payments, which the Iranians apparently pushed for initially, but an investment fund of that scale designed to allow Iran, its government, its economy, its infrastructure, to rebuild in the aftermath of the military campaign that has degraded significant portions of its capabilities. $300 billion. Let that number sit for a moment. The IRGC. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not just Iran's military. It is one of the dominant economic actors inside Iran, with deep involvement across construction, energy, telecommunications, and finance. When we talk about rebuilding Iran's economy with a $300 billion investment fund, we are talking, at least in part, about resources that will flow through or adjacent to the IRGC, the same organization that fired anti-ship missiles into the Strait of Hormuz. The same organization that funds and arms proxy forces across the Middle East. The same organization that has been designated as a terrorist organization by the United States government. This report has not been confirmed by the Trump administration, but independent sourcing suggests the reporting is directionally accurate. If it holds up, it fundamentally changes how this deal needs to be evaluated. The administration has repeatedly framed this as a great deal for the American people. But a $300 billion investment fund flowing toward a government whose military wing just spent weeks shooting at American ships and personnel is going to face serious scrutiny, and it should. On the question of the highly enriched uranium and where it might go, there is an interesting third-party development worth noting. The Financial Times is reporting that Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, has disclosed that Kazakhstan has formally proposed taking custody of Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpiles. This proposal was made during a meeting with the Kazakh president. Kazakhstan is a country with significant nuclear infrastructure and a history of denuclearization. It voluntarily gave up the Soviet nuclear arsenal that remained on its territory after the Soviet collapse, which gives it a certain credibility in this kind of conversation. But here is the problem with that proposal in the current context. Iran says it will not give its uranium to anyone. The United States says Iran has agreed to hand it directly to the Americans. And now Kazakhstan is offering to serve as a neutral third-party custodian. Three completely different frameworks for handling the most dangerous material at the center of this crisis, all floating simultaneously with no clear resolution. That is not what a finalized deal looks like. That is what a negotiation in progress looks like, one where the fundamental questions are still very much open. While all of this diplomatic activity is happening, military operations have continued. Another MQ-9 Reaper drone, this one operating over Yemen, was reportedly shot down by the Houthis. Video of the drone going down and burning was shared publicly. The Houthis are Iranian proxies. Their continued willingness and capability to shoot down American surveillance and combat drones, even as their patron Iran is supposedly negotiating a peace deal, tells you something important about the limits of whatever Iran's leadership can or is willing to deliver in terms of restraining its network of regional partners. There is also a direct contradiction between Trump's announcement that the blockade is now over and what U.S. Central Command is actually doing on the water. Even after the president's statement, CENTCOM announced that 115 vessels had been redirected and were being refused exit from the Strait of Hormuz as they were attempting to leave Iranian ports. 115 ships. The military is operating as though the blockade is still fully in effect, which means either the president's statement was premature or there is a gap between what is being announced at the political level and what military commanders on the ground have been told to do. Neither of those explanations is particularly reassuring. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth also weighed in, speaking to American troops during a visit and framing the situation in characteristically direct terms. He described the choice Iran faces as binary: come to the table, give up the nuclear program and reach an agreement, or face the full force of the American military. He recalled a moment in a cabinet meeting where Trump looked at the camera and made exactly that point, gesturing toward Hegseth as the embodiment of the military option. The message being sent is that the military pressure is real, it is credible, and it remains on the table. Whether that message is being received and processed the same way in Tehran is a different question entirely. So let's step back and try to take stock of where we actually are, because the competing signals are significant and they deserve to be organized clearly. The United States is saying a deal framework has been agreed to, the blockade is being lifted, and Iran has consented to American retrieval of highly enriched uranium. The Iranians are saying they will never give up their uranium, that they negotiate with missiles, not words, and that they do not trust guarantees or commitments. The military on both sides continues to operate in ways that do not reflect a settled peace. American forces maintaining what looks like a blockade, Iranian proxies shooting down American drones. Reports suggest a $300 billion investment fund may be part of the deal, which has not been confirmed or denied by the administration. The president is in the situation room, making what he describes as a final determination. What we are watching in real time is a negotiation between two parties who have fundamentally different understandings of what has been agreed to, what the terms mean in practice, and what comes next. That kind of gap, when it exists at the moment of signing, does not typically close on its own afterward. It widens. And it widens in ways that can be more dangerous than not having a deal at all, because a broken agreement provides cover for the party that breaks it to claim the other side acted in bad faith first. The core strategic question hanging over all of this is whether the United States is walking away from this confrontation with Iran having fundamentally changed the threat, or whether it is walking away with a piece of paper that Iran will use as breathing room to reconstitute, rearm, and reemerge as a nuclear threshold state within a few years. The bombing campaign degraded real capabilities. The blockade created real economic pressure. The question is whether those gains are being cashed in for a durable settlement or being traded for a temporary pause that Iran's own leadership is already publicly framing as an opportunity to prepare for the next confrontation. None of that is a final verdict. It is too early to deliver one. The deal has not been signed. The terms are still being finalized. And there is still a version of events in which what looks like chaos and contradiction today resolves into something more coherent. But the signals that are visible right now, the Iranian rhetoric, the gaps in the stated terms, the uncertainty about the uranium, the possible $300 billion fund, the blockade confusion, none of them point toward a clean, durable, enforceable agreement that leaves the United States in a stronger strategic position than it was before. The next several hours will be defining. Whatever President Trump decides in that situation room today will shape the trajectory of American policy in the Middle East, the global energy market, the credibility of American military deterrence, and the long-term nuclear threat posed by Iran for years, possibly decades, to come. The weight of that decision is immense. And right now, there are far more open questions than there are settled answers. We will continue to monitor this as it develops. The situation is moving fast, the stakes are as high as they get, and the details that emerge in the coming hours will matter enormously.